Alright, howdy folks, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Broken Arrow. Today we're going to go over the entire US arsenal as of the November 12th beta version. I and many people with me have been having tons of connection issues, and also my computer doesn't really seem to like running this game. I'm running it on potato graphics and my PC sounds like it's trying to take off into the stratosphere, so there's still a bunch of issues with the beta. With that said, today I want to go over all the units in the American faction, in a future video all the Russian units. There are of course 2 more specs or specializations to be added to both factions, so there's not a complete list of what you'll see at release, but this is a complete as possible list as of November 12th's open beta. And finally, something I personally just prefer is turning on these stylized unit cards, which look a lot more like Wargame Red Dragon or Warno compared to these more icons and silhouettes, which are a little bit more minimalistic, but I just really prefer these stylized images. With that being said, the Force Recon are the USMC standard infantry recon team with 2 options actually for their loadout: a Green Ops, which is a marksman rifle and grenade launchers, as well as the Black Ops, which is a little cheaper, costs 15 points less to deploy, but you do lose access to those grenade launchers and to the marksman rifles, but you do get a couple of shotguns. Now these stat cards are actually quite detailed. For example, on the shotgun, we can see we have 20 rounds of slug, we have a 200-meter range, certain penetration, and what targets our weapon is effective against, in this case infantry vehicles, and somehow even helicopters, though I sort of doubt the efficiency of this specifically. There's also a more basic view, which just gives you the amount of weapons in the squad, the range, the ammo, and then the penetration, the damage, and the sort of dispersion slash accuracy. Moving on to the scout sniper team, we have an M38 DMR backed up by an M40A5 sniper rifle, though we can upgrade that to the M107. You just lose a little bit out on range. We go to the more basic setup, you'll see here 800 meters or just 1200, but we do lose a little bit in terms of accuracy, but we gain a little bit in terms of damage. So there's a couple of offsets, and of course you have to keep in mind the 10 extra points to call in the unit every time you do that. The Humvee GMV, which comes in a wide variety of different setups of the minigun, an M250 cal, a Mark 19 grenade launcher, or the default M240. Then the IFAV M2, which in this case comes with the M250 cal, though we can upgrade it, actually changes its name over here as you can see to the Mark 19 for the same points. However, we do get a lot less ammo. The TOW 2A ATGM, which is obviously more focused on anti-tank duty. Moving on from the IFAV, we have the LAV-25, of course the workhorse of the US Marines. We can upgrade it with a A2 armor, optics, and smoke package. You'll notice a couple of things here. First of all, it gets the smoke symbol, which means we can drop smokes. Actually, you can see the smoke launchers right here. Then if we go back, you'll see the optics go up from 1400 to 1700, and last but not least, a mostly all-around smaller armor upgrade in terms of kinetic and heat protection. Orange numbers are heat, white numbers are kinetic protection. So a pretty decent upgrade, but this costs you now 20 extra points to call it in. Moving on to the cavalry scouts for the armored brigade. In the recon tab, they have no upgrades, but they do come with this very awesome javelin, which has a heat projectile and attacks the top armor of vehicles, which obviously with a 750 heat pen, and it comes down on the top of vehicles, this M1A2 only has 60 on the top. So this is going to never penetrate the front at 1300, but due to the fact it's a top-down attack, it'll definitely deal a lot of damage to almost every single armored vehicle, in case the missile hits, that is. Then the M3A2 CFV, a Recon Bradley. I do really like the look of these Recon tanks with the camo netting on. Again, keep in mind I'm running this on potato graphics. Armor package wise, we can give it the Busk reactive armor, a big upgrade especially to the side in terms of more than 3 times the base heat armor protection. Of course, comes at a little bit of a cost in terms of points, but not a cost in terms of movement. Besides the armor, you can also give the M3A2 a jamming system, which gives it a 30% ECM chance. While the M3A3 only adds 300 meters to the optics range between the M3A2 and the M3A3, and it can also use the same Busk reactive armor, it can also use Busk 3, which gives it up to 500% more armor in terms of heat protection on the sides and 400% more in terms of heat protection on the front, which honestly is a pretty big upgrade. Besides that, you can even give it an engine upgrade, which just makes it go a little faster, but obviously it does come at the cost of 10 extra points. It goes from 55 up to 70. And finally, you can give it the Iron Fist active protection system, which comes with 2 projectiles that'll engage and hopefully destroy incoming missiles aimed at the Bradley. Of course, this makes it a very expensive unit, especially if you go for the full upgrade, almost basically more than 50% more expensive. However, it does mean it has a lot more staying power, which is honestly very awesome, especially for a very well-equipped recon unit. The M7A2B Fist has a bunch of the same upgrades in terms of armor, has the same APS system, but you can customize it with more eyes. By that, I mean a lot more 2400 over the 2000 seen on the M3A4 CFV, and even more engine power. But you are sadly losing the TOW 2s on the side. So you can see I'm actually having some connection issues still, even just in the arsenal. Finally, in the Armored Brigade, the Recon vehicle, the M981 Fist V and M113 with an ATGM on the top, can be upgraded with a little bit of extra armor and smoke launchers. Moving on to the Army Sniper Recon team. 3-man team with an M203 underneath an M4. We have an M110 with a suppressor and an M2010 bolt-action sniper rifle also with a suppressor. Now you can change the M2010 into an M107 as well. Same thing as before with the Scout Snipers, a little bit more range, you get less ammo, a little bit more damage, more penetration. But the weird thing is, there is no statistical difference between the suppressed M110 and the unsuppressed M110, so I'm not really sure why this really matters. Maybe the suppressed M110 has like less of a chance of getting you spotted if you're shooting. M107 has 30 rounds for this squad or this team, but for the Scout Snipers, the M107 has 20 rounds, perhaps because you have a third member and they can say one of the guys can carry an extra magazine because there's 10 rounds on these magazines for the M107, but it's a little bit of an interesting thing I noticed. Moving on to the Humvee LRAS 3, this one has a bunch of options available. We have smoke launchers, which is kind of a really cool looking upgrade. We have an armor upgrade, but this does remove, and this is an important thing to mention, but it does remove the airdroppable capability. If you're playing as the Airborne, to lose the airdrop capability, I'm not too certain about that one. And of course, you can upgrade it with a 50 cal or with a Mark 19 grenade launcher. The main point of the LRAS is, of course, use its laser designator to help paint targets for incoming rockets or artillery. Then the Humvee RWS, pretty similar to the LRAS, comes with a Mark 19 grenade launcher or a minigun, which actually is kind of cool. And it's the same thing, armor, and of course you can have some smoke grenades as well. Moving from the Humvee to the MQ-1C Gray Eagle. This can carry up to 8 missiles, 4 Hellfires, 8 Stingers, or 8 Griffin missiles, or sort of a combination of, say, 4 Griffins, 4 Stingers, or 4 Griffins and 2 Hellfires. You kind of get it. So this is very cool, a lot of customization, and gives you just a lot of options in terms of what you really want to do with your drone. And it's not like locked into one certain role. Well, I say that as the RQ-4 is locked into the pure recon role, as it has no weapons whatsoever to speak of. I did want to quickly mention this, going back to the M1A2, you can click through some of these different camos. I think this is a very work in progress, as it says even here, feature. This is a little bit of a customization feature. It might be cool later on down the line if they say have winter maps or desert maps, and you can really customize your armor to fit the environment a little bit better. Moving on to the Infantry tab, the Assaultman SMA for the US Marine Corps spec. They're an 8-man team that has 2 SMAs, which has 8 thermal barrack rounds and 8 anti-tank heat rounds. These have 400 meter range. You get 16 rockets in between the 2 of them, up to 600 heat pen. Do keep in mind you can upgrade this team for 10 points to the SRAW, which does cost you 8 rounds. You get 8 rockets and you go from 16 to 8, but you do get 50% more range, from 400 to 600 meter range. Downside is that you have 25% of the original penetration, which isn't great, but you do a lot more damage. And I believe this is more of a focus on dealing with larger squads of infantry, or perhaps with lighter vehicles. You do have more range and a little bit more damage. But if you're dealing with heavier armored vehicles or ones that have tons of ERA protection, yeah, the SMA, definitely a better solution you just have to get closer to them. Moving on to the Dragon Squad, really a support squad with a heavy machine gun, a medium machine gun, and 2 types of anti-tank. Either the Dragon, you get 8 rockets, or you get 1 javelin, which does cost you 4 missiles, but this is a top-down attack with a little bit more range, going from 1,000 to 1,300. This is a clear upgrade in terms of basically everything, unless you're really going to be engaging a lot of lighter vehicles or use this more as a support backup team and have a different unit like the Cat TOW deal with the heavier equipment. The TOW 2A team is kind of similar to the Dragon. It get a 50 caliber, it gets a Mark 19 grenade launcher, and it gets a TOW ATGM. You can upgrade this, however, to the TOW 2B. It gives you less heat pen, but it does again come in from the top. It's another top-down attack missile. Moving on to the Marine Raiders CQC. They're really a close quarter focus unit with a bunch of 6-barrel multiple grenade launchers, as well as shotguns, and of course a couple of laws for close defense against lighter vehicles. You can upgrade them though to the standoff version of that team. You give them M27 IARs, you give them 2 Mark 48 medium machine guns, 2 SCAR Mark 20s, which are marksman rifles. We can go over here, we'll see they have that 50% ignore cover bonus. And last but not least, the upgrade goes from the 8 laws with a 300 meter range and 65 pen to 600 meter range on the M3E1. Of course, the Marines wouldn't be the Marines without, well, the Marines. Initially, their squad is the Reserve Marines, 13 men for 70 points. You get a bunch of M16A4s, a few underbarreled M203 grenade launchers, and 3 M249 light machine guns. Upgrading them to a regular Marine squad gives you 13 M27 IARs with a couple of grenade launchers. They do take over the role of the SAW or the M249 in this way, so you lose access to those, but you do get 6 AT4s, obviously a big upgrade from, well, having none at all. Moving on to the Mech Engineers in the Armored Brigade spec. They are a smaller team, but the main focus here is going to be on those 2 shotguns as well as the 5 SMAW-Ds. And yes, someone will probably make a funny reference in the comments to that essay. Ds. The point of this is 16 blast radius, relatively low penetration. This is really effective against infantry in buildings, perhaps a lighter transport like a BRDM or a BTR, sort of a cheap anti-infantry or anti-entrenched infantry unit, as long as they can get within 400 meters. The Mech Rifleman, pretty standard squad, get a light machine gun, a grenade launcher, and a couple of these single shot AT4s. The Mech Rifleman AA, pretty much what it says on the tin. It's a Mech Rifleman squad. They gave him a stinger and they took away their 4 AT4s. This is the exact same squad. Finally, the Mech Rifleman medium machine gun team. Again, just a Mech Rifleman team, but you get 2 medium machine guns. You do drop the grenade launcher, and you also have no anti-tank or even anti-air capabilities. Finally, in the infantry category, the Airborne spec. Here, the Airborne are armed with the M7 Spear as well as the M250 LMGs. These all fire the 6.8mm cartridge. It's actually a very interesting weapon system. I know a little bit about this from playing Escape from Tarkov, but this is a pretty interesting squad. No upgrades whatsoever. 75 points. The main thing here to take away is a little bit more range and a little bit more penetration on these rifles compared to, say, a standard M16 or M4. Then the M2 HMG team, pretty much what it says on the tin, just a tiny 4-man team with 2 M4s and 2 50 cals. And then the Mark 19 team is just that, 10 more points, but you upgrade the M2s to Mark 19 automatic grenade launchers. Stinger team, guess what? Same idea. You get 2 Stingers now. So this is the sort of upgrade path, 50 cals, 2 of them, 2 Mark 19s, and now you get 2 Stingers. The TOW 2A and the TOW 2B upgrade are also available for the Airborne. The only thing it really changes is instead of going directly at the target at 900mm of heat pen, the TOW 2B will fly on top of the target, hitting its weaker top armor, but obviously has less heat pen, which is not a big issue because I'm pretty sure most vehicles will not be able to resist this penetrating the roof. The weapon squad for the Airborne has a bunch of M4s, 2 medium machine guns, and 2 javelins. Really sort of a support group, probably supporting these Airborne. Have the Airborne up front with the spears and the M250s and a couple of these AT4s. Have them covered by the weapon squad squad with more heavier firepower, of course, as well as a few of these awesome javelins. Moving on to the vehicle category, the AAV can be upgraded with a little bit more armor or a lot more armor. Honestly, if you're going to go for an armor upgrade on this thing, you really might as well just go full on for the bigger upgrade, because otherwise, what are you wasting your points on? On to the ACVP. This can be upgraded in terms of weaponry to a Mark 19 for free, which is, I guess, a sort of a side grade, like, hey, what do you want to do? Focus more on one or the other. Or given a Bushmaster 2 autocannon, pretty decent upgrade, is going to cost you a lot more money. However, you give it the armor upgrade as well, which gives it like 50% more kinetic and heat protection. Is that worth 10 points? I'm not really too sure, but the option is there. Moving on from the ACV30, we now have the LAVAT, which can be upgraded with a modernized version of the tow system. As you can see, goes from a 2A to a 2B, and has that same top-down attack. So this is very similar to what we did for the infantry, where you get the top-down attack versus the straight-on attack. Also, we can get a little bit more armor and smoke. Moving on to the M1A1 FEP. Something I want to make sure people are aware of: when you upgrade a vehicle with extra armor, not only do the sides or rear or front or whatever get extra armor, in this case, obviously more heat and more kinetic protection, there's other options. For example, here, we get an extra 50 cal going from 1 to 2 with the second one here over the barrel. Do keep in mind, upgrading your armor usually, if not always, does increase a vehicle's hit points as well. So for 20 points, you're not just getting an upgrade on the side armor, you're getting an extra 50 cal, and you're also getting a little bit of extra health. It may be worth it in the long run. We can also give it either a jammer or a trophy protection system, where the jammer will only be a chance at destroying incoming projectiles. The trophy system is, I believe, always on target. However, you only get 4 reloads, and then you're out of the protection system, which makes the jammer cheaper, a little bit less reliable, but maybe more autonomous in terms of not having to resupply this vehicle all the time with more APS. And also, it makes it pretty expensive. It comes to $355, whereas originally it was $265. The M1A1HC, very similar. We can give it an armor upgrade, which in this case adds the same things, adds more armor to the sides, adds another 50 cal, and adds a little bit of health. With the protection system this time, only available is the jamming system. The M60A1 is a weird one. This one has the 105mm gun. However, we can sort of downgrade it, where it goes from 115 down to 90 points, where it goes and gets the Hesh 165. It really turns it from a light to sort of medium tank into, well, really an engineering vehicle, helping you deal with entrenched infantry in, say, buildings. The Armored Brigade can get the M113. In terms of that, we can get a 50 cal or Mark 19 grenade launcher. We can get slat armor and a smoke, which gives us a little bit more protection, obviously a chance. Oh, actually a little bit. It's a lot more on the front and sides in terms of heat protection, and as well as a set of smokes. The M1150 Assault Breacher. This thing is very interesting. It carries these MIC-LICs, which are basically just like tiny MLRSs or rocket launchers. We only get 2 of them targeted towards, say, an entrenched building, and then it has a 130mm blast radius and even ignores cover of up to 50%. This is hopefully to dislodge enemy units in cover. We can change that 50 cal into a Mark 19, and we can even give it more armor, though I'm not too sure about the frontal armor needing more heat pen or protection, but 2 extra hit points, and especially that side upgrade, that's actually a pretty spicy one. Going from 250 to 700 will definitely be useful, as this vehicle is going to get flanked as it moves in on infantry inside of a town or a bunch of buildings. The M1283 AMPV. This has a 50 cal, a grenade launcher, a Bushmaster 2 30mm cannon, or a Bushmaster 2 with a side-mounted javelin. And for 40 points, yes, it makes the vehicle twice as expensive, but you do get a javelin on a transport vehicle. Upgrading it, we can give it reactive armor even, and smoke, which is a 500% side and 400% front upgrade in terms of heat protection, and even a little bit in terms of kinetic protection. So yeah, it becomes 100 points, whereas the vehicle originally was only 40. That's a lot of firepower to reckon with in terms of just a funny little transport to send along with your incoming infantry. The M1A2 Abrams can be upgraded. It's kind of the base model with Tusk or Tusk 2, which just gives it either the extra 50 cal here on both levels, and it just gives it a little bit more protection on the sides and more hit points, going from 17 to 18 to 19. So more armor, an extra 50 cal, a little bit more health. Is it worth 25 points? That's for you to decide. Now on the M1A2 SEP, the same idea, extra 50 cal, more health, and more armor. Same thing on the SEP V2, however this time, we can not just go for the Tusk or the Tusk 2 package, we can even go for just say the Trophy Active Protection System, or if you want to go all the way out, you can get the Tusk 1 plus the Trophy, or the Tusk 2 plus the Trophy. Now we're really talking about a tank that's going to be hard to knock out, has a lot more armor than the base model, especially on the side, and it now has a trophy system to help defend against incoming projectiles as well, but it does make the vehicle a lot more expensive. Moving on to the SEP V3. This is going to have HE rounds as a dedicated round, has a little bit more range, 1400 now up to 1700, and a little bit more protection as well. Of course, you can upgrade this with the whole trophy and APS system and have the Tusk armor, but you're looking at a 400 point tank at that point. The M2A2 Bradley can obviously be upgraded, as we saw with the Recon, with a Busk reactive armor and even be given a jammer as well, but it's that same thing. We just have a 30% chance to hopefully deter incoming enemy missiles. Moving on to the Bradley ESV. Regular Bradley, sort of, but this one has the Blam. This is a sort of ATGM, which isn't really an ATGM. It's really focused towards destroying entrenched infantry or lighter vehicles. Relatively low heat pen, but a lot of blast radius of 40 on this. So they're basically 7 missiles more or less dedicated to engaging infantry, light vehicles, or infantry inside of a building, reactive armor, and of course a jammer to help it sort of protect itself in those city environments, while it'll most likely be effective against dealing with longer range infantry down, say, a street. The M2A3 Bradley, much like the Recon, can be given different types of reactive armor, a Iron Fist active protection system. Again, incoming projectiles will be targeted, as well as a slightly upgraded engine, but obviously this makes you to go from, well, 130 for the full model to only 75 for the base model. So the difference between the M2A2 ESV and the M2A3 is initially anyway, is only a couple hundred extra spotting range. Where the A3 has options and the A2 has less is in the upgrade system. The armor package, we can pretty much do the same thing, although we can actually get the Busk 3 on the A3. We can also give it an APS system to deal with incoming missiles and upgrade the engine. It does make it go from 65 to 120. Remember, it was only 5 points more than the base M2A2. The M91A3, this is a TOW 2 on a M113. We can also give this one armor and smoke, much like the Recon version, just this one doesn't have the optics that the Recon version did. Moving on to the Airborne vehicle tab, it's a relatively light one with the Humvee, which can be given a bunch of different weapon systems from an M240, an M250, or a Mark 19 grenade launcher, or, well, no weapon whatsoever if you really want to save 5 points. Armor, you can give it the armor upgrade, which yes, gives it 20% more health and gives it a little bit more extra armor, but you're losing that airdroppable capability. The Humvee with the TOW A2, again, TOW 2B with the top-down attack, armor to do the same thing I said before, and smoke launchers, which actually might be kind of useful, especially for the TOW version. Then the M1301 ISV, which can actually carry 8 members from a squad, whereas the Humvee can only carry 4. So this is more of the sort of standard larger squad transporter. You can give it a couple of different weapons, but that's really about it. A 50 cal or a Mark 19. 50 cal almost looks like a little bit oversized for this vehicle. Moving on to this Sheridan. I've always loved this tank ever since World in Conflict. This has a 152mm low velocity gun. It does come with a couple of heat rounds, but the HE is really where it's at with 44 blast radius. You do have 600 mils of heat pen, actually not really too bad. I considered would have probably been worse. However, for 5 extra points, you get the Shillelagh, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, ATGM, which is fired from the barrel, which has a little bit more range, and I'm assuming since it is an ATGM, it'll be more accurate than the heat round, because obviously you can sort of guide the ATGM where to can't really guide that shot after it's been shot out. Moving on to the M8 AGS, a light airborne tank. Couple of interesting upgrades. Number one, applique armor just gives it a little bit extra armor. The applique plus Iron Fist gives it obviously the same armor, but also now the APS, so you can take out 2 incoming projectiles. The ERA gives it a massive upgrade, but do you really want to upgrade your mediocre airborne tank to no longer be airdroppable? However, when you also go take a look at the main gun, from a 105 up to a 120, which has a little bit more range and has a lot more penetration, but you do have less ammo in total available for it. So this is an interesting little trade-off you have to make, but in the end, I would personally never ever put the ERA on this, because what's the whole point of the airborne tank if you can't airborne deploy it? The US Marines have their own version of the Miklik, however, it's not on the back of an Abrams. For them, it's on the back of an AAV. Besides upgrading the armor a little bit or a little bit more, they can also upgrade the actual Miklik itself to go from 3 rounds to 21. They also get a little bit more range, going from 1,000 to 1,200, but you do get like 7 times more ammo. You do lose a little bit of pen, but I really can't imagine the penetration is really what you're too worried about. You go from 130 blast radius to 150, but you do lose out a little bit on the damage when you upgrade. However, 75 points extra, which means you're basically bringing the vehicle from 75 points to now 150. Moving on to the LAV-AD. This is a 5-barrel 25mm chain gun, as well as 2 quad launcher Stingers. The thing is, with these Stingers, they are obviously only against helicopters, whereas the 25mm technically could be used against ground vehicles or units of infantry as well. Armor upgrade gives it a little bit more armor and smoke, and obviously a little bit more health. For 0 cost, you can actually take one of these pods off and replace it with a Hydra rocket pod, which can be fired against infantry or vehicles, unlike the Stinger, and technically against helicopters, though I'm not too sure about the effectiveness of that. But having this Hydra as a backup actually seems like a pretty good idea and not a bad deal, especially considering it's free. The LAVL is more of a supply vehicle. We can technically upgrade it with a 50 cal or a Mark 19 and give it some armor, but in the end, you probably just want to make this thing as cheap as possible, because you just want this thing to get there, drop its ammo and supplies off, get out again. Moving on to the LAV-M, which is a mortar in the back of an LAV, besides the armor upgrade, which is just a little bit of an armor upgrade, and I'm not too sure if it's worth doing that for 10 points. You can upgrade or sort of side grade the main weapon into the Dragonfire. It becomes a 120mm mortar from an 81mm mortar. You might be wondering, well, why wouldn't I do that? 66 HE rounds and 33 smokes versus just 21 HE and 12 smokes. You also get a couple of these laser guided shells, but in the end, you're just gonna have to rely on numbers in terms of how often do you want to reload or not. In terms of range, a little bit extra range, 2000s versus 1800. The LVSR can be given a weapon to defend itself, medium machine gun, a heavy machine gun, or a Mark 19, as well as given a little bit of extra armor protection. Then the MTVR, again, we can go for a Mark 19, a 50 cal, or a medium machine gun. That's not really that different. By default, it's just an armored troop transport variant. For 10 extra points, I believe you can actually give it supplies. Before, I don't think it can, and now we can suddenly give it 6,000 heavy lift weight, but it does lose out on a little bit of its armor values. For the Armored Brigade, the M1064A3 is again a mortar system. We can now swap between mostly HE or smoke. It's kind of cool, so you can decide if you want to have it more of a supportive role or more of an engagement role, or you can even add a couple of guided rounds to it. Much like before, you just have a few of these. Then you can give it some defensive weapons, a Mark 19, a 50 cal. If your mortars are getting engaged at a point where you need to defend them with weapon systems, I'm thinking it's mostly too late. I do kind of recognize that armor might be useful, or at least smoke, in case a shell lands near, or maybe a helicopter ends up seeing you and drops a couple of rockets your way. If they're heavy ATGMs, this is not going to save it. If there are a couple of FFARs, then this may or may not decide whether your unit lives or not. The M109A6 Paladin can be upgraded to swap from HE to Cluster, obviously focusing more on dealing damage to vehicles in a wider area and hitting the top of a vehicle's armor versus just kind of hoping that some high explosive damage causes damage to the vehicle if it lands near it. The A7 Paladin can have an armor upgrade, which is it gives it a little bit of extra armor. What's really interesting though, give it the Iron Thunder upgrade, where it goes from having HE, smoke, and laser guided now to a single type of ammunition. If we swap over to the more basic screen, you'll see 4,300 meters up to 5,000, and relatively more accurate, at least more accurate than the regular HE, with the same amount of damage and penetration, but this has more range and also has a better reload time. The M1287 MCV, another mortar, this time 120 mil by default. You can now swap between mostly smoke or mostly HE, give it some guided ammo. Again, we can sort of give it a defensive weapon. I said this before, at the very least, an armor upgrade, I can definitely see one of these where you give it more than a 500% increase basically in heat protection on the side. Then the M163 Pivads, which can be given a little bit of extra armor as well as smoke. The M2070 MLRS, you can swap between high explosive ammo. I'll flip over to this screen here to cluster warheads. As you can see, it lowers the actual damage by a lot. And then the ATACMS, this is more of a ballistic, actually it says it right here. It's a ballistic missile, so it has a lot more range. We're going from 5,300 to 7,000. It has more accurate rounds. It has more damage and does more penetration. It's just that you're going from 12 rockets down to 2. The ATACMS, because it is a ballistic missile, that will be able to be intercepted, thus risking sort of two ways if you're bringing the ATACMS. Once it's obviously you get less rockets, and B, it can potentially be intercepted. The M2070A2 can also carry HE and clusters, but interestingly enough can also carry 4 400mm ballistic missiles. So the difference between the HE, 6,000 meters, 100 pen, 18 damage, a lot more accurate by the way, going from 210 down to just 10, 8,000 meter range, which is obviously a 30%, 33% upgrade, more pen, a lot more damage, but in the end, yeah, these things I believe again can be shot down, and that's a big risk you're taking when you are shooting these, and they also cost 700 resupply. The M54-8A3, just more of a, again, a transporter, nothing really to see here. You can just give it a couple of different defensive weapons. The M6 linebacker serves the same role within the armor brigade as the LAV does for the US Marines. The linebacker is a Stinger carrying Bradley, which obviously kind of forgoes the tow missiles for it. You do get 12 Stingers. We can upgrade this to a SHORAD, which now it gets a 30mm cannon, which can also engage missiles, I should add, and the regular linebacker can't. And finally, the SHORAD, the Hellfires obviously can engage ground vehicles as well, and you still have this awesome SHORAD system, which is by any means incredibly scary even for enemy infantry and light vehicles. Of course, you can give it some armor, the Busk and the Busk 3, and upgrade its engine to give it a little bit of a speed boost. Then the Patriot Pack 2. This obviously is a very well-known anti-air and anti-missile system. It can be given some extra armor. It can be given a little bit of a defensive weapon on the top here in case you really are worried about getting run over by some infantry. And then last but not least, you can upgrade it from 2 missiles to 4 missiles, giving you obviously twice the bang for your buck, and you don't have to buy 2 of them, considering buying 2 of these would be more money. We're talking 270, whereas if you just buy one of them like this, it'd be 195, so you are saving money. This thing, obviously, if you're using it by itself with the upgrade, has a higher chance of getting hit by a seed, or if you only have one of these available and it gets knocked out, it might be better to spread it out and spend a little bit more points than just getting one with the upgrade, but in the end, it's just going to determine, and be determined, I should say, by what your army composition looks like. Finally, the Airborne have access to the Avenger, which is an anti-air system on the back of a Humvee, which can get, can be given armor. You get health and a smoke, but you also lose that airdrop capability, which I think is a pretty big no-no, at least for the Airborne part. In terms of that, we do have a Stinger and the M3P 50 caliber Browning. However, we can double missile pod this thing up and give it an extra 4 missiles, which is kind of weird that it doesn't go from 8 to 16, but it goes from 12 to 16. But you do get a second set of these Stinger missiles, really being able to clear out the sky if a large enough attack happens and you only have one of these available. The Brutus or Brutus artillery is just an air transportable version of a howitzer, high explosive or cluster rounds. In terms of armor, if you upgrade it with extra armor, you get 2 extra health, a little bit armor on the sides and rear and front, but you lose the airborne capability capability. So I just don't really see the point in playing Airborne and then getting this, and then not bringing it in as an Airborne unit. The Hawkeye MWS is a 105mm howitzer on the back of, well, guess what? A Humvee. We can give it the armor and a smoke upgrade, but yeah, you lose the airdrop capability. You do get a smoke, you do get more health, but it's really to decide for you what you want to do. Then you can swap between HE Cluster or HE Rapid, which has a little bit more range, as you can see, but I don't know if that's necessarily worth it. We'll take a quick look here. That seems to be about the only difference between these two, is the extra range of 300 meters. So unless there is a different thing that I'm not seeing here, then I think this is an incredibly not worthy upgrade to the Hawkeye MWS. The LMTV is a truck that can be deployed via the air, can be given a little bit of a machine gun or a 50 cal or grenade launcher. Giving it armor doesn't take away the ability for it to either deploy troops, transport troops, or even deploy some supplies. The MTV, however, this is more of a drive troops into the map from off map, whereas the LMTV you would drop with, say, a larger airdrop via an aircraft, and then this thing can help your troops drive around or come with some supplies. This is the airdrop version, and this is the come in off the side of the map by its own version. The Slam Ram, last but not least, in a support category, has an armor upgrade, and that is honestly barely worth it for 10 points. But it does come with 4 AIM 120s or 6 AIM 120s or 4 AIM 120s and 2 AIM 9s. This is the anti-air and anti-missile. This is the anti-air and anti-missile, but bigger. And then this is the anti-air and anti-missile with 2 sort of shorter range, more focused towards helicopter missiles. Moving on to the helicopter tab. There's only 2 because the Armor Brigade does not have any helicopters or aircraft. In terms of helicopters though, the Super Cobra for Marines has a bunch of weapon systems. And you'll see all of these have a whole bunch of weapon systems that are very configurable. The inner pylons, you can carry Hydras, either 14 or 38. We can carry, as you can see, an absolute insane buttload of different variants and variations of stuff on the inside or the outside. Hydras, more Hydras, tows, 8 tows, 8 Hellfires, even 2 sidewinders or sidearms. And these, the sidearms, are seed, so they're really focused on taking out enemy radar. Interesting note here though, you can go pretty cheap by just bringing 14 Hydras and nothing else. This helicopter is now only 95 points, but you can also make it quite literally go for 215 points. And this is what I think is so cool about Broken Arrow. If you see an enemy Super Cobra, you don't know if he's focused on a few rockets or more rockets. And you don't know if he's focused on Hellfire. Is he focused on air to air? Is he focused on air to seed, I guess? Is he focused on heavy AT? Is he focused on medium heavy AT? Is he just focused on blobbing like 76 rockets on the ground? So you'll have to encounter people's units before you actually can figure out what they're focusing on. I think that's really cool. The AH-1Z Viper, a couple of options here. We have Hellfires, we have these APKWS rockets, which are laser guided, but are really focused towards lighter vehicles with that 70mm of pin, as well as just a couple of very cheap Hydras. We have more options on this side, allowing us to kind of bring a lot of Hellfires and even some Sidewinders or side arms, again, to seed or the anti-air focus, or just 0 and just for some reason carry 16 Hellfires on board if you really want to do that. Or you can just be really cheap and just bring a Viper with, I don't know why you would, but you technically just kind of could be really cheap about it. So lots of customization and options there. The Super Stallion is a transporter of supplies, vehicles, and of course infantry. You can, however, upgrade its machine guns from the M240 to the GA-17 and the GA-21, which then comes out the side here. I'm not really too sure if it's worth spending even 5 or 10 points on a different machine gun, especially because it's only on one side. The King Stallion is even a larger version, but you can carry just a little bit more of supplies and but not more men. It's kind of noticeable though, a little bit better vision as well. You can carry 2 machine guns on the side, 2 miniguns, or 2 of these GA-21 HMGs, which I think are just 50 caliber versions of miniguns, whereas these are only 7.62. The Osprey is a very interesting one. I believe this might be the fastest rotary aircraft in Broken Arrow, mostly due to the fact that obviously after it can fly vertically like a helicopter, it can tilt its rotors and then fly more or less like a regular plane. By default, it comes at a GAW 21, but you can also give it a tiny little GAW 17 here underneath the aircraft to give you some fire support. But really, spending 5 points on that, I mean, you're already spending 150. I mean, it's such a small difference added to it. Yeah, I'm just not really sure that's worth the 5 points. Then, of course, the famous Venom. You can upgrade the 2 M240s to 2 M134 miniguns, and you can give it a couple of pylons for a little bit of extra support. Say you're dropping in guys pretty hot, then you have a couple of these APKWS or a couple of Hydras. I mean, for 10 points, I don't think it's that crazy. It only adds a little bit of cost to the helicopter. It might make you sort of mop up some light resistance if your helicopter is engaged any. For the Airborne, we have the AH-64D Apache, which is just like the Vipers and Cobras, relatively modular in terms of what you want to bring. By default, it just has, well, a couple of Hydras, but you can bring those APKWS. You can bring a whole bunch of Hellfires as well, making it, of course, relatively expensive. So the longbow does an Apache, which has a radar set on top, does allow you to bring these fire and forget Hellfires. They're expensive. They're a little bit more expensive than these regular ones on the Apache. If your Apache gets destroyed or something happens to the Apache, say he loses sight or anything like that, the missile will still go after its original target, whereas the other Hellfire may end up missing, especially if your helicopter gets destroyed before it gets to the target. The Chinook, obviously a heavy lifter, sort of a comparison to the Super and King Stallions. You can give it a couple of different machine gun variants here again, miniguns or the GAW 21. But, you know, again, are you really going to worry about the 10 points on 140 point? I mean, you shouldn't be fired upon in this Chinook, or you're probably in more trouble than you're willing to admit. Then the last two, the Kiowa, which is more of a recon helicopter, but the cool thing is you can actually kind of customize some of the things, like the optronic mast, which gives it 100% more recon capabilities, which is honestly sweet, and gives it the laser designator ability as well. However, you can also change its weapon loadouts on either side. You can go for a bunch of Hydras, you can go for a bunch of Hellfires, you can even go for a bunch of Stingers, or, well, any combination. This actually looks really silly on the top like that. Almost looks like a cartoon head. These are its two teeth, and these are its two giant eyes. But hey, at least you have the option to, and any sort of combination. It's actually pretty freaking cool. The UH-60 Black Hawk is, of course, a transporter for the Army. We can have some different machine guns in there, much like this actually look kind of ridiculous with those giant 21s in there. But yeah, that's about all the upgrading you can do. Again, if you're getting shot at in these, I don't think that the slightly more points put into the machine guns is going to make a big difference. For the aircraft, the Marines get access to the Harrier 2 Plus with a ton of customization options. For example, in the center line, we can have nothing. We can have the GAW 12 equalizer, an ECM pod, which is not bad, a laser designator, or a combination of some of these, so it can make it pretty expensive. On the inner pylons, right now we just have 2 fuel tanks, which will allow it to fly around longer. However, for the inner pylons, we can take the fuel tanks off and go from 240 down to just 150, assuming these are seconds as time over targets. This is how long your plane can stay without having to fly back for more fuel. We have AMRAAMs, Mavericks, different sizes of JDAMs. Either we have laser guided 500-pound JDAMs, or we have 2 of them, but they're 1,000 pounds. We have Zuni rockets, and make them pretty expensive. We even have some more sidearms, again, for seed. And now your aircraft can go from 340 down, if we make this as cheap as possible, down all the way to 145. So we're adding 200 points basically to the Harrier. The night attack, very similar, just a whole bunch of different bomb loadouts, weapon loadouts, fuel, Zuni rockets, Hydras, cluster bombs. There's a lot, honestly, more on this than I think you'll ever need. The Prowler, obviously a seed aircraft, which is focused on disabling enemy radar IA. We can go for 2 fuel tanks, or 1 extra fuel tank, but still a harm, or an extra set of 2 harms. We do obviously go from 300 seconds down to just 180. So maybe you're better off going to swap in between the 2 of them. So 1 ECM, this way you have 2 harms, 1 fuel tank. But really, do you you really need the fuel? I mean, this is the question. This is the customization you have to figure out for yourself. The Hornet and the F-18C, we have a bunch of AMRAAMs and Sparrows, or also you can just have no missiles whatsoever on the fuselage. Under the inner pylons, we can have a bunch of bombs, bigger ones, 2,000-pound bombs, smaller ones, a couple of AIM-174s, AMRAAM, Sparrows, fuel tanks, or even just very dirt cheap Hydra rockets. There's so many possibilities for these, like there's probably millions of combinations in the game in terms of upgrades. Then the Hornet D, we can carry a whole bunch of bombs, laser guided bombs, fire bombs, by the way, which is an interesting little napalm type bomb, snake eyes, cluster bombs, and Mavericks for those dedicated ATGMs. However, we can also go for SLAM ERs, missiles that are going to have a 10,000 meter range. They're really focused on HE. Obviously, as you can see, they're also interceptable, so they can be shot down. The F-35B, very, very famous, of course. This can carry a low drag bomb in the form of the JSOW, which is a 1,000-pound bomb, which is a 4,000 meter range, or a couple of AMRAAMs. However, we can change this to storm breakers, a bunch of other JDAMs, and of course some AMRAAMs. We can really go for a full air-to-air loadout if you are interested in that, but then you're only carrying 4 of them, which doesn't seem that crazy good, though it looks like if you even grab 6 Stormbreakers, you are still getting 2 free, I should say, AMRAAMs at any given time. Moving on to the 130J Harvest Hawk. This is more of a air transporter, dropping units, dropping vehicles, dropping supplies. You can give it 10 of these Griffin missiles though, which are a little weird. They're really focused on dealing with infantry or light vehicles, especially looking at the damage in terms of penetration. The Hellfires on this are actually weird too. These are top-down attack, low pen, but more blast radius. So these are again focused on dealing with enemy infantry or vehicles, but not heavy armored vehicles. Technically, they could try to go through the top of a heavier tank with that 90 mil pen. It'd just be a sort of a gamble that you're taking. And you can bring a couple of these GBU Stormbreakers, which are just bombs with a pretty big blast radius. The Airborne Infantry can rely on the B-1 Lancer here with 24 JASMs. That's 24 cruise missiles, but we can also give it, as you can see, a whole slew of other things, including AGM-86, which has, as you can see, more blast radius and more damage, but isn't laser guided. And of course, the B-6112 tactical nuke, which is a bomb and not a missile. I believe the Russians have a missile on their nuke launching aircraft. The Americans have a bomb. It does require, I think, to get a little closer, but the bomb obviously itself cannot be intercepted. And while the cruise missile fired by the Russians with their tactical nuke, that definitely can be intercepted. The C-130J Hercules for the Airborne is sort of the equivalent of the Harvest Hawk, just there for transporting units and deploying armor, deploying vehicles, deploying supplies, but doesn't have any upgrades available to it. We take off all of these pylons though. The Airborne version does have a little bit more carrying capability in terms of weight, almost 50% more in terms of personnel, and other than that, it's relatively similar, but it's good to keep in mind. So by default, these planes are the same cost unless you start adding weapon systems to this one, to the Marine one, but the Airborne one can carry more men and more supplies. The Gloatmaster is just obviously a massive transporter, just a massive upgrade over to Hercules. Just, yeah, well, don't put all your eggs in one basket. If this thing gets shot down to start the game and you lose your entire loadout of units, that'd be pretty funny. Then at the end, we have 3 variants of the F-15C and E and EX Eagle. The original F-15C can just bring a whole bunch of more dedicated anti-air standoff weapons. And finally, we can also bring a couple of extra fuel tanks, though the difference is like a minute or 3 minutes up to 6 minutes, which is honestly kind of crazy. The Strike Eagle is a more ground attack variant of the F-15C. It can still carry a couple of air-to-air missiles, but its focus really is on bombing runs. Multiple 2,000-pound bombs, and yeah, you'll end up with a bunch of AMRAAMs, a bunch of laser-guided JDAMs, and a laser designation pod. Yeah, you're paying $480 for this thing. Oh my, wait. You're paying $580 for this thing. Clusters, 4 big 2,000-pound laser JDAMs, a single dumb JDAM, 2 AMRAAMs, and 2 Sidewinders. But yeah, that's an almost 600-point unit. That's a lot of points to have flying around to get one shot if you're unlucky. Last but not least, the EX Eagle 2 combines what Sea Eagle and the E Eagle can carry, basically. So we can now carry 18 AMRAAMs, a laser designation pod, and all of the cruise missiles, bombs, clusters, and everything in between that the EX Eagle 2 can carry. You're looking at an over 650 point unit. We're getting close to 700 points. This is a lot of points to lose in a single strike. That being said, a very long look at the American units in Broken Arrow. In a future video, we'll take a look at all of the Russian ones in the same fashion. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.